This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Matt Gupta.
Chapter 12. Felthor's Hall of War. The lords quickly retreated into the fortress's upper floors. The feast meant that their departure went unnoticed by most, and the captains, who had taken notice, quickly covered their absence. Even through the stone walls, they could hear the drunken melody of Willem, the young rider, a song that was designed for being sung in a drunken slur. Turgon sighed. It was clear that he wanted to return and join his men, but he stood firm to his duty. Gilorn respected him for that. He could say what he wanted about Turgon, but no matter what depravity he engaged in, he could always be trusted to put his duty first. It was a hard decision, though. He quickened his pace and quickly took the lead of the group. He threw open the door with a loud bang and moved straight over to the far side of the room, letting the distance separate him from the sounds of brotherhood. The others made their way inside and closed the door. They took their seats in the room, bringing chairs over into the center. It was very informal, but serious. So, Felthor sat, not offering the rangers a chair. Tell us everything. Leave nothing out, Richard added, as he munched on the flesh of a chicken bone. We need copious amounts of detail, Turgon agreed. He pulled his chair to face away from them and sat on it like he was riding a horse. Yes, my lord, Gilorn obliged. We followed the intelligence that the southern turncoats had provided us with. We stalked orc scouts into the forest and evaded their efforts to clear the meeting place for their masters. We waited until the moon was at the zenith. Then a green-skinned man with several ogre bodyguards arrived. He was dressed all in black and wore a crown of black iron. His gauntlets and boots were the same. His beast was immense, some kind of monster. His presence seemed to turn the forest on itself. The birds took flight, the insects recoiled. Even the moonflowers shrunk away. The earth parted for him. Iorlem shivered as he recalled this part of the story. He signaled his presence with a roar of terror that cut the air. It shook inside us, and it was all we could do to not scream out in pain. Gron Lud, a voice crept in from the corner. The group all looked to see the intruder. Conditoris, Richard roared in delight, tossing the bone carelessly over his shoulder. When did you get here? How did you get here? Felthor asked, clearly wanting his question answered first. Think about who you are talking to, Conditoris huffed, somewhat affronted by their questions. But this is not the time for pleasantries. Yes, indeed, Felthor agreed. He stood up and offered Conditoris his chair. He quietly took another for himself. You know of this man? He was my brother once, Conditoris sighed, graciously taking the seat and pulling out his pipe. But he has long forgotten himself. All he knows is power and the desire to have more of it. He is the strongest of our order. In times past, he personally destroyed the world. His forces reigned supreme in the world until they were defeated by the combined strength of all the rest of us. The Alliance could not risk the return of the orcs, broken or not. They destroyed the Orc Kingdom, killing every single orc, troll and man there. But he kept coming back for every exitum. The only thing stopping his return was the kingdom's watch over his territory. Then that ended with the death of the last king 500 years ago. Everyone knows the tale, Turgon nodded. The story was burned into all of them, even the rangers. Forces under the command of King Summer had led a massive engagement with the orcs and destroyed their forces with a single battle to the death. Indeed, Conditoris grunted in irritation at the interruption. The Battle of Gognul lasted longer than any battle in all the world. But Gron abandoned his army and disappeared. He let them destroy his kingdom in favor of his own survival. The lords of the kingdom bowed their heads in respect. "May summer rest in peace," Falthor said. "Yes," Conditoris puffed through his pipe. "The poor man was driven insane by losing his nemesis and was drowned in the river when he thought he saw the man hiding under the surface." "A stain on the face of the kingdom," Turgon spat. Gron had taken the greatest man in the kingdom, and then he made his final victory. The army returned back to the kingdom frontier, and the new High King Valens took the command. He continued the campaigns throughout his 4-year reign, and won much renown destroying the Orc remnants and rebels. But he returned to lose his life at Adrianople against the resident Goths, whom he had seen as invaders in his homeland. There was a sigh from around the room. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but they did not put voice to their thoughts. Valens had not named an heir or successor when he went to face the Goths. The princes and nobles of the kingdom battled with each other over his throne, dividing the kingdom and destroying everything they had worked to build. When it was over, Vespasian of the Stewards, the only captain general still with an army, took up the call to be king. It was Vespasian who had declared that the stewards would rule until the High King arrived to claim their throne. It was a show of respect and hope for his King Valens, but it had been perverted by every dictator that fought for power since his death. History would be grateful for this intervention, as it averted the kingdom's collapse, but it had led to the events that had brought them together in their plans to rebuild it. There was silence for a long time. To the heroes of that age, Falthor toasted, raising his glass. The others followed suit, including Gilorn and Iorlem, despite the fact they had no drink to toast with, and simply saluted. Falthor gulped loudly and let out a sigh of satisfaction. "Continue," he said to Gilorn. For a moment, Gilorn had to remember where he had been in the story. When he did, he continued. A man with ancient kingdom armor arrived. He was flanked by men with cruel armor and evil looks. He was called Barjag. Afterwards, they waited for the third man, one dressed in the armor of a dragon. He was named Dorogon and was flanked by samurai, or I assume they were. Then the one called Vilmin arrived alone. "Only 4, Conditoris asked. "Others came, my lord, but they were in shadow and were of little importance." Gilorn nodded. Those with power argued about the state of the south, whether or not the fall of the Golden King fitted in with some dark plan they had birthed. "The south?" Turgon laughed. "That ruin of a kingdom is ancient history now. The Golden King's son has shown himself to be both useless as he is cruel. He has taxed every coin from his people, and he doesn't have half of what is needed to endanger us." Gilorn nodded. Iorlem continued the story. They argued the same case. The Golden King seemed to be something of a thorn in their side, and they concluded that his death had helped their cause. They aimed to unite the South under some kind of legend, to combine the South army under their banner. Gron commanded that they bring in someone called Ramal, a man clad in serpent skin and wings of a bird of prey. Conditoris nodded. "The Southern Immortal. He was named well, for he betrayed us countless times in the world above. He has led countless men to their deaths for the sake of curiosity and amusement. He was marked the lowest of us, and he was never going to have a place in the world after we saw what he was." "Well, it looks like he's going to get it now," Iorlem said. "They didn't say what they wanted him to do, but it seemed like it would happen soon." They then moved on to the subject of manipulating events in the kingdom. claiming that someone's corruption had begun, saying that they would be able to place us as they wanted. Who were they talking about? They did not say. Gilorn shook his head. They described him as the leader of the biggest threat to them. Conspirator huffed, deep in thought. This didn't seem to make any sense to him as it did to the others. Falthor turned to Richard. Do you have any idea as to who they may be? I can think of many men who could lead the kingdom to destruction, Richard said, after a drink, the ale dripping into his beard. The barbarians have been restless of late. Their raids have increased, and many of my knights have faced them travelling in force. What has been done to face them? Turgon asked. Aquila and Conditoris. Richard nodded at the immortal. Both argued that action would be needed. I have begun to build up something of an army to recapture Hadrian's Watch. If that fortress is captured, no threat can pass. Conditoris huffed again. Something was on his mind, but he made no indication that he would reveal it, nor that he should. Falthor nodded again. We will consider this further, but for now, continue. Gilorn was getting tired now. His lips were getting sore and cracked. Turgon recognized the symptoms and poured him a drink. Gilorn drank half and gave the rest to Iorlem, who drank it happily. They then discussed Dragon's Keep, Gilorn continued. The one called Dorigen told Gron that his people longed for war and that the king's desire for peace was nothing, and he could command an army with a single word. Now this is deadly. Falthor let out a long exhale. King Kemik of Dragon Keep has an army of almost 25 legions behind him. But his project for peace with us has kept his hordes at bay. Who is this Dorigen? He placed the final question to Conditoris. He is the ancient shogun of Dragon's Keep and the surrounding lands. During the first exitum, he and his brother led his armies to conquer the 20,000-mile stretch of land that is now his empire. He was our greatest strategist, and, when the first exitum came, he was the only hope against the orcs. Conditoris glowered at nothing in particular, the shadow of a memory seeming to flicker in his eyes. He made a devastating choice when all seemed lost. He turned to dark magic, sacrificing his brother, and began to delve into the minds of the orcs to turn them against Gron. He held them back for years, but he was lost to the darkness. We only just managed to defeat him. He's just as dangerous as Gron himself. The group's thoughts recalled the lessons on the battle against Dorigen's armies, Dorigen himself being a particularly difficult foe. The immortal had lengthened the combat considerably by himself, and it had made the battle that much harder. It had taken nearly all the power of the kingdom to defeat him alone. Dorigen had no wisdom in his head and had fought to the last, even when his army abandoned him and commanded the retreat. Gilorn nodded in agreement. This man Gron started to talk of his own forces. His host seems far well armed and efficient, but he said he would not rush to war. He would wait and watch. Conditoris dropped his pipe and began to choke. Are you getting too old for us, my friend? Falthor asked, patting him on the back. Conditoris gave no reply. If this is true, then we must assail him with all haste. We were only able to defeat Gron because he was reckless. If defeat has sharpened his mind, then there is no hope for us. There is more, Gilorn said, hastily. They discussed a search for someone they called the Heir. They claimed that he had returned to the world and were waiting for him to appear to their notice. Did they say anything more? Falthor frowned. No, my lord, Iorlem said. The orcs were becoming aware of our presence, so we had to leave. Of course, Turgon threw his arms up in the air in frustration, just as things were getting interesting. Ready my horse, Conditoris cried, standing up violently. I must make haste. I must confirm this for myself. You have a horse? Turgon asked. Where were you keeping that? Could you not wait until morning? Falthor sighed. You only just arrived. If the enemy moves against us, Conditoris said, then we must be prepared. You must assemble your armies again and set a watch against the orcs. Easier said than done, Turgon grunted. Falthor agreed. We have a plan in place. Nothing can happen until the wedding. Only then can we move. And the mood of the kingdom is not one for war, Tiberius said. We are all here for the wedding. If we were to ride to war now, it would spoil the opinion of the kingdom. If this is as important as you claim, Turgon jeered, why not seek your Aquila? He has the steward's ear to his cock. Take care how you speak, Richard growled. He may be pompous, but Aquila is a good man, and his counsel is wise. A rare trait for someone so young. Conditoris let out a huff. I thought that elves were hard to work with, he cursed. You play your chess game at the world's peril. We do what we have to do, my lord. Falthor lost patience. I would ask, when has one of your order ever risked everything to save us? What debt does the kingdom owe to the immortals, that we would abandon everything at your word? You order us to our deaths and give nothing in return. Turgon smiled. Falthor's boldness was amusing him, and he never had much opinion for Conditoris. Conditoris turned to face him. His blue eyes flashed with lightning, and the candles around them began to flicker as if a rough but tame storm was blowing in the room. What do you owe me? He bellowed. His voice was terrible, low and echoing. The rangers and Tiberius looked around the room, feeling the stone and wood quake with the noise. They had never heard Conditoris's rage before, but Falthor and Richard had. They were not perturbed. Turgon simply watched Conditoris, as if his position showed him for what he was without his magic, like seeing an illusion from an angle it was not meant to be. I have saved your kingdom many times over. If you doubt me, be welcome to fend off the enemy without me. With that he left, his wooden staff clunking against the stone stairs, until the noise disappeared from their ears. Turgon laughed. That was interesting. I fear the repercussions of that, Falthor panted. His words did have some truth to them. Conditoris had been repeatedly demanding that the kingdom sacrifice all in the vigil against evil. Countless troops and armies had destroyed themselves at his words. But Conditoris himself had only fought in a handful of those battles, and, when he had, his tactics had been the same. Fight to bitter end, fight to the last man, sacrifice themselves if necessary and feel no repercussions. Falthor feared Conditoris more than he let on. He was a dangerous man disguised as a likable one. He dreaded the day that the kingdom's defense would rely on his command. He felt he would destroy the kingdom if it meant he would win the battle. Fear not, Richard smiled. Immortals are like a storm in winter, shocking and quaking, but quickly past. All Conditoris sees is his brother and the opening of his arse. I'm sure he does. Falthor nodded slowly, his eyes looking into the window and out into the distance, where Conditoris would be leaving by horse. But he is right. He may be, Turgon grimaced, but it doesn't change our situation. Ignatius won't let you have an army unless the kingdom is threatened, and even that is less than certain. This is exactly what I meant when I kept my army together a year past. Falthor sighed sadly. You were right, Richard said, reassuringly. Ignatius will realize it sooner rather than later, particularly if I would say anything about it. Falthor nodded. We need to act on this. He turned to Turgon. What is the strength of the garrison here? 8,500, Turgon said, as if from memory. The Second Legion is little over half strength, but can be rebuilt inside of a week. I don't have any mind about rebuilding the entire army yet, Felthor said. I need to organize a response force for what these immortals have planned. Begin raising a force, but slowly. I need their clash to be one that will shake the foundations of the Marble City. To make Ignatius think that threats are genuine. Tiberius smiled. He nodded with a superior understanding than that of his father. Richard grunted in disgust. You Southerners with your plans and your schemes. In Horseland we fight our enemies on the field, where we can look them in the eyes. We do not sneak in the shadows. I leave you to your treachery. He clapped Felthor on the shoulder. Do not scheme for too long. Wine waits for no man. I won't, my friend, Felthor reassured him. They embraced each other's right arms with a firm grip. But maybe you should stay. You may find you develop a taste for scheming. Life is too long and too short to spend looking over your shoulder, Richard grunted. I shall await you downstairs. Don't drink us out of supplies, Turgon smiled. I make no promises. We must not be rude, father, Tiberius said. It is still a long ride to Seaward. Richard belched and thumped himself on the chest to release the final part. Fuck politeness, he rumbled. I mean to drink until I piss in 3 different directions at once. I would pay to see that, Turgon said. Enjoy yourself, my king, Felthor smiled, raising a hand. Feast as you ride, hard and unyieldingly. Richard let out a rumbling laugh as he and Tiberius left the war room. The 2 rangers bowed and exited as the 2 men remaining turned to each other. So, Turgon said darkly, what sort of distraction would get Ignatius's attention?